I should have said, if you're of a squeamy disposition, you probably should look away. Epic journey. That is the journey of the red land crab on Christmas Island in just off Australia. So Christmas Island, it was discovered on Christmas Day, that's why it's got the name. But those are the red land crabs, and they go and they lay these millions of eggs, the adult crabs, and then they just sweep across sort of a short time afterwards, I think it's a number of weeks. They come out of the sea and they head back across land. And then around about this time every year it happens. So if you're planning your holidays and you want to go and see that, it's amazing. They've built huge infrastructure and kind of barriers to stop them crossing roads now. And there's one bridge that those crabs, the adult crabs, climb up 5.5 metres, go across this bridge, and then down the other side so they can get safely to the other side to avoid the lorries that are working in the mine on Christmas Island. But that's a fairly epic journey, isn't it? Apparently, if you open your door, I remember watching a documentary about it when I was a boy, and they showed this person opening the door, and the crabs just want to make a straight line from where they are to where they've got to go. So you open your door, and any crabs that are that side are going to use your house as a route through. No matter what happens, they're going to get where they're going. So yeah, what a spectacular thing. I look at that and I kind of think, God's got a great sense of humour, hasn't he? Just, these people are inconvenienced for weeks on end by these things. Anyway, epic journeys. I was preparing this for this morning, and I was thinking about that journey, and then I brought back to memory a journey, not long after I started here, actually. Back in January last year, I had to get to Bedford. Now, I don't venture across that side of the country very much. Yeah, January this year, sorry, yes. We're still in it, aren't we? I'm wishing the year away. January this year, I had to get to Bedford, and I remember setting off, and because of some of the settings that had changed, my sat-nav started playing silly games with me. And my heart sank, because I didn't know where I was going. You know that thing where we now trust that little screen more than ever? Yeah, well, I had to sit down and I had to dig out of the back of the car in the boot. There was an old map book, and I had to get the map book out and pull over in a lay-by and chart my journey on the map, going, okay, so I've got to go there, and then write down the instructions and try and memorise them without a co-pilot to read them out to me, because that's what Mum's job always used to be when we were going anywhere. Mum would read the list of instructions. But I was thinking about this and thinking about journeys, and then I was listening to Caroline's testimony this morning about she's come so far in the time that she's in this time period of, was it 2 years, I think she said? Some of you know her story far better than I do. And yet God has brought her to here, was what she said. This is where I am. And so we're going to spend some time just thinking about moving together. And moving together is sort of our title this morning. And we're going to be looking at the story of Moses, a passage in Moses' life taken from Exodus chapter 13, verses 17 to 22. Now, I'll give you a brief synopsis of Exodus to catch you up to this point. We've talked already, haven't we, in this series about Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph. And those key characters have led us to this point. Abraham was promised by God that he will have an inheritance of the nations, and it's just built, and now suddenly we get to this point in Exodus where the nation of Israel, Jacob arrived with a family of roughly about 70 people, and now about 450, 430 years later, the nation has exploded. In fact, Exodus starts with these words where it says, the people multiplied and filled the land. And that's an echo of the opening of Genesis, where God instructs Adam and Eve to go and multiply and subdue the animals and fill the land. So that's the opening of Exodus. And as we're going through, we see Pharaoh, who is the most wicked character in the Bible up until this point. He's the meanest character thus far, and rebellion, we're meant to see him and look that rebellion against God can look like this. That's the point of Pharaoh. He hates the immigrant Israelites and seeks to enslave and destroy them. Okay, we've seen some of that recently, haven't we? Somebody reacting against the nation of Israel or the people of Israel. He sets about destroying babies. He says, kill the sons. He commands the midwives to go and kill the sons. I was reading in preparation for this as an aside. It's really interesting. Cleland Thom, in his book Moses, The Making of a Leader, he says Satan will always seek to destroy the children. That's his strategy. When he's going after the innocent, when he's going after the children, if he can get them, then he feels like he's winning. And so that's why I prayed for the children as they went out, because our children, we need to pray that God will protect them against the strategy and the work of the devil who would seek to destroy them. Carrying on, that's a side point, by the way. Carrying on, Moses has his own personal exodus when there's a couple in the book. I was saying to Noel, I'm reading a great book at the moment called Echoes of Exodus. And it shows how that the picture of Exodus keeps cropping up in the Bible. And why does it keep cropping up? But as an aside on that one, just as a side note, have a little study when you get home, because sometimes we read the beginning of Exodus, we read, and I'm guilty of this in this moment, we kind of skip over it as a bit of a prologue to the main action of Moses going and confronting Pharaoh and the plagues and all that's coming. And I think, Prince of Egypt kind of gives us that image, that there's this kind of bit at the beginning that we can kind of skip over, and then there's the exciting bit that God does. Go back and read the beginning of Exodus and have a look for the key characters in Moses' life. Give you a hint, they're women. Interesting point, I was reading and thinking, the women, so his mother is foundational, her faith in God. The midwives who rebel and disobey Pharaoh and seek to preserve the babies. There's Miriam, his sister. There's the princess. The key figures in his life were women that brought him to the place that he was in. Again, a side point. I can delve into that deeper with you if you wish. So Moses ends up being a prince in Egypt. We were praying this morning for Asia Bibi and saying how that she now has so many people. This Christian woman, I don't know if any of you have heard her story, Christian woman was accused of blasphemy against the Prophet Muhammad and Allah by Muslims. And so she was locked up for 8 years, largely in solitary confinement. And praise God, the court just overturned it and released her. However, they were going to release her and they realised that essentially they've signed a death warrant of their own in releasing her. And so they're now protecting her and she's seeking asylum here. But we were thinking about her and I was thinking about Moses, saying God took Moses and hid him in plain sight in the very house that was seeking to destroy him. I love God's sense of humour and irony, don't you? He does things and you're kind of going, well, I wouldn't have gone about it that way, but okay. God hides Moses there in plain sight so that he can have the greatest impact in God's plans and purposes. Carrying on, he confronts Pharaoh, and Pharaoh chooses to harden his heart. And then we come to the Passover. Go. Okay? That's where we're at now. The Passover has been celebrated. We're going to celebrate a communion later, which is Jesus' application of what happened at the Passover. He takes the Passover celebration that the Jewish nation remembered God's goodness and his mercy and his saving power, and Jesus says, all of this is about me. And he makes it a meal for us. And so we're going to join in that together at the end of this service. But before we do that, let's read this passage together, and then we'll hear what God has to say to us from it. So it's Exodus 13, verses 17 to 22. And we read there. When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest the people change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt. But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea. And the people of Israel went up out of the land of Egypt, equipped for battle. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with you from here. And they moved on from Succoth and encamped at Etham, on the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them along the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, that they might travel by day and by night. The pillar of cloud by day and the pillar of fire by night did not depart from before the people. What a scene. What a scene that's unfolding in this passage. And so we start off, as we're looking at this journey, looking at an alternative route has been found. Have you ever, Bex has got this really fancy sat-nav system whereby if you're driving along and it identifies that there's traffic build-up on the motorway, it will then go, a quicker route has been identified. And I'm always loath to press OK because I just know. I know the way it works. I drop off the motorway there, I clear the way out, and then the motorway swings out into full flow again. It's the way it works, isn't it? But we find that that's how this passage opens, that an alternative route has been found. So if we look at the map, that's right, I've got a map up there. Can you see the Mediterranean Sea up the top in that section, just peeking down? Well, Egypt is over here. They're wanting to head to Canaan up there. And anybody planning that route is going to go straight line, aren't you? You're kind of going to go from here across to Canaan. From there to there. This is where... Is there one? Ooh. Ah, hey. Hey, this is good now, look. Whoa. It's the little things that entertain me. So you go from here, across here, to Canaan. That's what you do, isn't it? I love listening to dads talk about journeys. I always remember, like somebody would go, people come round to our house and they'd say, oh, I'm going to Cardiff next week. And Dad go, oh, well, what you want to do is you want to take the 465. And then when you get down to the sort of the far end of the 465, take the second junction off the, and then you turn. I used to look at him going, how do you store, hands up, just out of interest, hands up if you have an encyclopedic knowledge of certain areas of the UK. We can see the people that travel at this point, can't we? There's Dick and Paul going, yes. But you know those people who kind of just know. You say, I've got to be somewhere, and they say, well, there's that route, and then that, and then you take off there. Or they'll go, oh, well, you don't want to go that way. No, there's roadworks on that route at the moment, so I drop down here and go across here. Well, we see that God plans an alternative route. But the first thing I want you to see is who is leading. Let's do the blindingly obvious question first, and you can shout out an answer, feel free. Who's leading the people? God. Oh. Did you do that deliberately, Dick? Just to... I think so. It's God. It says God led people. Moses is the man at the front. Moses is the guy who stood there, but it's God that's leading. It says there, doesn't it, that God... it says God did not lead, but God led. I did have that originally as the title for this section. God did not lead, but God led, which seems a really odd way to do it. But God plans an alternative route. It says he did not lead by the way of the Philistines. That bit there is the way of the Philistines. How do I know that? Because it's labelled the way of the Philistines. No. It's the way of the Philistines. It's the way, the trade route across the top there, the military and the traders and everybody would have used, and the Egyptians would have had camps placed along there. And so God knew that the first thing that Israel would face if they went that route would be war. The first thing they're going to hit is opposition and difficulty. And so God plans an alternative route. You see, it would have been the quickest route, but it was the most dangerous route, and God knew. God knew that they would want to turn back. He says, it's really interesting, he says, and God said. And I've been pondering all week saying, did God just kind of mention that? Just kind of, talking to himself? Or I think he said to Moses, he said, Moses, these people that you're leading, if I take them this way, they're going to lose heart and they're going to turn back to Egypt. Interestingly, it's not war that makes Israel, in the end, makes Israel long for Egypt. It's dietary requirements. When you read the book of Exodus, it's the fact that they're eating manna. And they say, we had leeks and onions. I love Keith Green, a Christian songwriter, wrote a song called So You Want to Go Back to Egypt. And it talks about eating leeks and onion by the Nile. Oh, what breath, but dining out in style. I just think that's a great lyric. But he says, you're longing for Egypt. Really? And so they end up longing for Egypt. But God says, if we take them this way, it's going to happen quicker. And so there's also a little phrase that I want you to see in verse 18, where it says, where is it there? But God led the people around by the way of the wilderness toward the Red Sea, and the people of Israel went up out of the land, equipped for battle. Some of the versions have a different slant on that, when it might be prepared for battle or armed. That word literally, when you hear that phrase, I don't want you to see in your head the Edinburgh Royal Military tattoo. Okay? That's not what we're thinking here. It's a phrase that means they just organised themselves into groups, probably about groups of 50, and they just marched out. So there's this thing, they're not an organised army. It's not that God's saying, well, you'd face war and you wouldn't be able to cope, but you're equipped for battle. It's this odd tension. Remember we said about tension before? God's leading them out in a parade of triumph and victory. We've been released from captivity. But they're organised, but they're not prepared for battle. And we'll see, if you read the rest of Exodus, you see how God prepares them. So firstly, alternative route is found. And that's the route, by the way. I don't know if that shows up on the big screen there. Yeah. So they go sort of down here. There's some discussion where they cross the Red Sea or the Reed Sea, but they cross across and they end up down at Mount Sinai. So that's the route that they take. Not exactly direct, is it? That's not as the crow flies. It's dizzy crow if it flies that way. So they head that way. The next thing is follow the signs for. I love that. When my sat-nav abdicates responsibility and says, at the next junction, follow the signs for Bristol. What? No, I bought you to tell me how to get there. Don't tell me to follow the road signs. Anyway, sorry, rant over. Verse 19. We read there's this really odd thing, an odd exchange. When we're leaving to go on, we went on holiday recently, as many of you'll know. And as we're leaving the house, Bex says all sorts of things like, have you packed your jacket? Yep, got that. Have you put a toothbrush in? Yep, I got that. What about socks? Have you put enough socks in? Yeah, I have, Mum. I bet. But anyway, we're heading out. The one thing she doesn't say to me at any point is, don't forget the 400-year-old bones of a relative. That never really kind of happens. But that's what Moses does. It says that he leaves carrying the bones of Joseph. Why is that? Why is he carrying the bones of Joseph? Joseph had prophesied on his deathbed at the end of Genesis. He prophesies and he says, for God will surely visit you and bring you up out of Egypt. He'd spoken those words. And Moses, this is a sign of faith from Moses. He's saying, this guy, the bones that I got in my hand, when he was alive, he believed God would come and rescue us. And so as a sign of faith, we're taking his bones with us because he asked us to do it. He asked us to take his remains with us. I was reading, I've got an African Bible commentary, and they were saying that in Africa, that's a huge thing, to be taken to the land of your forebears, to the land of your fathers. The Welsh sing about it. But, sorry, there's a rugby gag for those that... Anyway. To return to whence you came from. And so Moses says, we're taking his remains with us. I wonder if Moses' mother taught him about it when she was raising him on her knee. When he'd been returned to her. And when she realised that God was doing something in this boy's life. When she made that basket and put him in the basket and put him out in the river, that was an act of faith. She knew that Moses, there was something about this boy that was different. And so I wonder, as she sat him on her knee, as she raised him before he went to the palace, did she say, Moses, Joseph came here. And Joseph said that God's going to rescue us. And I don't know whether you're part of that plan, but when it happens, make sure to honour Joseph's request. That's just me speculating, imagining. But I can imagine that conversation taking place. You see, it was a tangible reality that God would rescue for the midwives, Shiphrah and Puah, and Jochebed, Moses' mother, and Miriam, his sister, and Moses. All of them were living in the hope God will rescue. And they see it happening. This is the moment when Pharaoh says, go, go. And in that moment, Moses describes it as God has rescued with a strong arm. Wow. You see, the past that they dwelt on shaped the future that they moved into. The past that they dwelt on shaped the future that they moved into. We're going to come back to that thought slightly later on. The next thing that I want you to see in these verses is stay in lane. Stay in lane, verse 22. When you're heading down a road and the sat-nav says to you, you need to stay in this lane for, and when things like motorways split, I get confused at those moments, and Bex ends up being a voice of reason in the car. Do I take the left lane or the right lane? I don't know, Bex. Which should I do? Which should I do? Just stay in the one you're in. Okay. I'm glad you're chuckling at my idiosyncrasies. It says in verse 22 that the pillar of smoke and fire, the pillar of cloud and fire, did not depart from before the people. When we were on holiday recently, there was a huge number of pheasants about. Huge number. Like, I've never seen... I lived in rural Herefordshire, and I have never seen pheasants of this number before. And the best bit was, we'd be driving down the road, and Bex would go, oh, have you seen all the pheasants in that field? And I go, what? And she'd go, keep your eyes on the road. Okay. But yeah, so there were these distractions cropping up, and I had to maintain my focus on the road. God was there in a cloudy, fiery pillar. I find it really interesting that the description is the cloudy pillar is to lead them, and the fiery pillar is to give them light. That's what God's presence does for his people. The cloudy pillar, God's presence gives guidance, leading, and it gives light. It brings clarity and the ability to see. God goes ahead of the people. He's leading them into freedom. Do you see that? It says that it does not depart from before them. Actually, there is one moment where God's presence departs from before them. One moment where his presence is not at the front, but it's behind them. And it's to protect his people. When Egypt is pursuing him, God's presence moves to the rear to protect them and shield them. But God's presence gives guidance and vision and clarity to his people. So, that's all very interesting, Phil. So what? So what? Well, we've been talking recently, when we were away on our leadership retreat, Coral brought a word saying that at the moment it feels like we're behind a slow-moving vehicle. And there's a wide load and we can't see round it and we're not quite sure where we're going and when it will open up. But at the right moment, and I can remember this from my grandfather when he used to drive a truck, at the right moment, the driver will lean out and signal you past. That was the word, wasn't it, Coral? That the driver would, the one that was in front would signal and say, now's the moment. Now we move. And so as a church here and as individuals, when we seek God's guidance and we're moving forward in him, then we need to look to his strategy and his guidance in these moments. And so there's three things that I want you to understand from what we've just looked at. The first one is God moves us as we are led. God moves us as we are led. God knows where we are. Okay? God knows where you are this morning. I know some of where you are. I've prayed with some of you about things, and I know some of where you are, but God knows where you are. And like Caroline testified, she says, God has brought me to here. It's not that he's abandoned you and let you wander. God has brought you to here. This is the moment. This is the time that he has appointed for you. You look to him in every situation. There's an old Chinese proverb that tells the story of a Chinese farmer who used to have an old horse that worked on the farm and worked in the fields. Then one day the horse escaped into the hills. And when the neighbours heard about this, they came to the farmer and they said, "Oh, bad luck, that's really terrible." And they were kind of really upset for him. And the farmer looked and replied, and he said, "Bad luck, good luck, who knows?" And then a week later, the horse returned and brought with it a whole herd of horses from the hills. And this time the neighbours congratulated the farmer, saying, "Wow, look at this, all these horses." And the farmer, "What good luck?" And the farmer looked and replied, "Bad luck, good luck, who knows?" When the farmer's son was trying to break one of the horses to ride it, the horse kicked him off and he broke his leg. And the neighbours came and they said, "Oh, what terrible luck." And the farmer responded with, "Bad luck, good luck, who knows?" Then the army rolled into the village the following week, and they were doing a conscription of all the healthy men, young men. And because he got a broken leg, he couldn't go with them. And so he was left in the village. And the neighbours came to the farmer and they said, "Oh, what good luck." And the farmer said, "Bad luck, good luck, who knows?" You see, in the moment, we can look at something and view it one way. But in hindsight, in retrospect, we see it in different light. In God's providence and God's plan, the things that are unfolding in your life will accomplish something that he will bring you through and achieve things in your life. You may be frustrated. God hasn't led you down a dead end. God hasn't led you into a street with no exit. He didn't take the people of Israel to the Dead Sea and just leave them there. What did he do? He opened a way through the sea that they may pass through on dry land. God doesn't take you through these seasons and abandon you there. You may be frustrated in the wilderness. That's what happened with Israel. The people of God got frustrated. And you may be frustrated when you're in the wilderness. But this may be not what you wanted, but in God's providence, it may be what you need. That's the amazing truth that we find in Scripture and in the many testimonies and stories of the people in this church. We find that we may not enjoy what we're going through. It may be a season in the wilderness where we just go, "What are you doing?" You may not want it, but in God's providence, it may be what you need. God moves us as we are led. Look for his leading before you take a shortcut. When I was preparing, this was the thought that stuck with me. That if you are in that wilderness moment, if you're in one of those moments this morning where you're not sure where God is leading to, I urge you, look for his leading before taking a shortcut. You see, Israel could have looked where the pillar was going and gone, "Nah, it's not for us. We're going to go this way." And they would have faced war and they would have lost heart and they would have turned back to Egypt. If you're in that moment, please, I beg you, look for God's leading. And if he's not saying anything right now, then wait until you know. Don't take a shortcut. There may be options that are open to you. There may be situations that you're in and you think, "Well, I could do this." But is that the way that God has led you thus far? Is that the way God's calling you to go? Maybe for some of you, that's what you'll hear this morning. That's what you need to take away this morning. That actually, it's not taking the shortcut, but sticking with God for the long haul. God moves us as we are led. The next thing is that God moves us as we live. God moves us as we live. You see, we're never truly stationary, are we? Someone has said that if you're not moving forward in something, then you're moving backwards. And I said earlier that the past that Miriam and Moses and Jochebed dwelt on shaped the future that they stepped into. They believed that God had spoken and promised he would rescue, and so they were looking for it and stepped into the rescue that he had brought for them. For us, it is true also that the past that we dwell on shapes the future that we step into. This morning, the past that you dwell on, the things that you take with you from the past, will determine the kind of future that you step into. So the first thing I want you to see is that you must maintain the good that went before whilst faithfully pursuing what is to come. Now there's a tension point. Faithfully maintain what was and faithfully pursue what is to come. You see, the people of Israel were commanded, Joseph instructed them, take my remains with you. And so they did that because they were remembering the good that was as they stepped into the good that is to come. As a church, we believe in prophecy. That's why we need to steward, and it's something that I've been thinking about how we do that. I want to try and think very practically about how we steward and handle prophecy faithfully, so that we hold it and we weigh it. As a leadership, we weigh the words that come before us and we say, this is from God. This we'll wait and see, and we'll hold on to it and sift it. And then as we step forward, we hold on to those promises of what God is going to accomplish. God has spoken in this place and promised things that have yet to be seen fulfilled. That doesn't mean that they weren't true and they weren't promised. It means they just haven't been fulfilled yet. So that's the first thing for us as leaders. I think that's a challenge to us particularly, that we need to think about how we steward the gift of prophecy well. We receive the words and we weigh it and we wait on God. The second thing is sacraments. So we believe in two sacraments, the sacrament of baptism and communion. And we maintain those things as a faithful pattern of Orthodox Christianity. And we're going to do that later. We're going to remember what was, what has been historically for thousands of years. This has been celebrated by the faithful people of God as they gather. And it's an important moment. That's why Saul brought that challenge the other week about how important it is that communion is at the centre of all we do. Communion takes us back to being reminded about what it's all about. It reminds us of Jesus. The other thing is doctrine. Now this one's one where I can see some of you will be tempted to go, oh no. There was an interesting article, I shared it with Sue on Friday night. There was an interesting article this week in a Christian magazine saying that a group had done a survey amongst Christians in this country and asked them it was more than two, but they listed two key doctrinal statements. The one was, do you believe that the Holy Spirit is A person, or B, a force? And over half of the people said that the Holy Spirit is a force. That's not Orthodox Christianity. That's not what we're handed down from the apostles to the church fathers to us. And the second one was even more shocking. They said 74% of people agreed that Jesus was the greatest created being created by God. Ah! I almost jumped up and down and screamed in my office when I read that. I was like, ah! That's not central, that's not true. And as a leadership, we're discussing at the moment and thinking about how do we hold on to these things. There's truth in this book. There is eternal, undeniable, of consequence truth in this book. And if we hold it loosely, it will escape our grasp. And we will have to wrestle like anything to claim it back. But if we hold it, and if we lay hold of it and believe it, then in this book, there is the truth concerning Christ, and so I know him more, and I love him more, and I want to follow him more closely each day. And there's great other truths and doctrines that are revealed there. So we're thinking of different ways that we can try and build that into our church life as well, that we build that in so that we're sound and robust. What are we called to carry with us, individually and corporately? Those are just three things that came to my mind as I was preparing this. But what are we called to carry with us as we move out? What individually are you called to carry with you? The good things. And what corporately are we called to carry with us? The next thing is we must lay down the things that were done to freely pick up the things that need doing. Okay, so there is a taking with and a carrying on, and there is a laying down and a picking up. We must lay down the things that were done to freely pick up the things that need doing. First thing I want to challenge you with here is habitual sins. Things that you keep choosing to do that you know are wrong. Places that you return to that you know you shouldn't go. People that you relate to that you know you shouldn't relate to. Habits that you know that you return to that you know you shouldn't. There are so many, and I'm sure I don't need to list them all for you. But there are habitual sins that we keep returning to. It's like the Israelites as they're heading through the wilderness, continuing to make bricks because it's what they used to do. How mad would that have been? How insane would that have been that the people of Israel continued making bricks because it's what they did in Egypt? But why? You're free. If you're a believer this morning and you're returning to sins of the things that just lay hold of you, you're free. In Christ, you're free. Now, that doesn't mean that it's easy to lay those things down and to walk away from them. But that's what we're called to. The second thing is old things. Leaving behind things is a natural part of moving on. I'm looking to move home soon. We're looking to move down this way. And I've had to resign myself to the fact that my shed is going to have to stay at the house. I'm going to have to leave it behind. I've got happy memories. Anyway, my shed is going to have to stay there. I'm going to have to leave it behind. Why? Because when we get to the new house, Bex has promised I can build a better shed. But that's the truth as well, isn't it? That's a spiritual truth, that there are things that we leave behind. That shed is great, and it was great for its time, and it held the mower really well. But when we move, and we move to our new house, I'm going to build a better shed that can serve the purpose better. And that's what God's purpose is for your life. There are things that are good that you're just called to leave behind. Why? Because he's moving you to somewhere better. He's moving you to something better. Jeff Mannion, in his book, The Land Between, this book here, good book, he talks about difficult transitions, finding God in difficult transitions. And he talks about the necessity of the land between. He says, actually, yes, Egypt was a land of slavery, but it was also a land that was lush in vegetation, had huge amounts of good food. In Exodus, the people say that they caught fish and ate it without cost. There were good things in Egypt. And Canaan is a land flowing of milk and honey. Canaan is a land with huge blessings to come with it. But the land between is not either Egypt nor Canaan. And he says that it is sometimes necessary to pass through the wilderness to then cross into the promises of what God has for us in the future. Maybe this morning, as you're living out your Christian life, there are things that you need to carry with you because they're good, and things that you need to leave behind because they were of the old world. You need to allow God to deal with you on those things. The third thing is God moves us on as we love. What are you following this morning? Are you following anything? Are you following nothing? Are you wandering aimlessly? Last night, we, as a happy little trio, went down to Dursley Fireworks. And it was great. Bex and I really enjoyed it. Alice? Yeah. She loved the fireworks, but she desperately wanted to go and explore. You've seen what Alice is like. She likes to explore. Now, the problem is, it's a new place with lots of people, and it's in the dark. And so she heads off, starts wandering, and then realises Mum and Dad aren't there, and freaks out. And you see, sometimes as Christians, we can do a similar thing. We can go wandering off, wanting to explore different things, and head away from what we should be. At one point, bear in mind, we paid to be there. I hadn't climbed over the fence. We paid to be there, and there's fireworks going up in the air, and I look down, and Alice is facing this way. There, look, bright lights, woo, ah. And then I look down again, and she's back that way. There's nothing there to entertain her, nothing there to look at. She's just facing the wrong way. This morning, are you facing the wrong way? Have you allowed other things to distract you? Other things to pull your eyes away from Jesus? You see, it says that God went before them as a pillar of cloud to guide them, and a pillar of fire to bring them light. And if you look away and look to other things to fill that place, to lead you, to bring light to your life, then you'll be doing exactly what Alice did. The pillars of fire, the fireworks are here, and you're turning your back and looking to the darkness and not finding anything there. Have your eyes wandered? Fix your eyes on Jesus, Paul urges us. He says, fix your eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Look to Jesus this morning. Just like the Israelites, we can walk through all of life with the assurance that we are heading to a better place. You think about it, every morning they woke up, looked up, and the pillar of cloud is there. God's with us. God's guiding us. They set out following this pillar. We're following after God. That's the truth of the Christian life. We may pass through the wilderness, we may pass through seasons of wilderness, but we pass through knowing that God is leading and we are heading to a better place. That's the truth this morning. If you believed in Jesus, if you acknowledge that you cannot earn right standing before God, and that the only way to be right with God is to accept that Jesus died in your place and paid the debt that you cannot pay, and opened the doors of heaven to invite you in. If you've believed those things, then it means that you're heading to a better place. You can face life knowing that with the assurance that you're heading to a better place. We're on a journey. There's a daily choice to be made. Do we turn and follow Jesus or walk away and reject him? What will your choice be? What will your choice be in the coming days and weeks, months and years? We heard this morning, didn't we, of a testimony. Sorry, as I'm new here, I don't know you that well. But a testimony from Colin saying he chose to turn and God has brought you back. God has, through his word, guided you back. God is faithful. God leads us through the storms of life so the Holy Spirit can turn our hearts towards Jesus. Together, I want you to be captivated by Jesus. I want you to see in Jesus the presence of God in your life, the Holy Spirit guiding you and directing your thoughts towards him, so that you will look to him and follow his direction and his lead, so that in all things you will know that you are heading to a better place. We're going to take communion shortly, and I'm going to invite the children back in, but I just wanted to share this. There's a great, an ancient document. I don't know whether I can describe it as ancient. The Heidelberg Catechism was an attempt by Christians to write down core truths of the faith. And when it comes to this meal, they say this: who should come to the Lord's table? And I love this description. If you fit with this, then you can come and take part in this table. They say, who should come to the Lord's table? Those who are displeased with themselves. Yep. Because of their sins, but who nevertheless trust that their sins are pardoned and that their remaining weaknesses are covered by the suffering and death of Christ, and who also desire more and more to strengthen their faith and to lead a better life. Hypocrites and those who are unrepentant, however, eat and drink judgment on themselves. That's what we're coming to now as God's people. If you are in that first category, if you're somebody who is displeased with themselves, do you know what? I spend most of my time being displeased with myself, thinking I haven't done what I should do. I haven't said what I should have said in that moment. I've not honoured Christ as I ought. I've thought things that I shouldn't have thought. I've entertained ideas that aren't edifying and aren't honouring to Christ. And yet, I trust that my weaknesses and my sins are covered by the suffering and death of Christ. If you're in that place with me, alongside me, then I'd invite you to come. We'll take of the bread and the wine and we'll remember that Jesus died, suffered and died in our place. We're going to invite the children back in to be with us in this moment. Why? Because God, with the nation of Israel, he brought them out of Egypt and he gave them the Passover meal to celebrate together. And they sat down as family together and they remembered that God had saved them.